Hello there.
Hi, how are you?
It's been about 2 months since my last upload for this project, so just a quick heads up before we get started. This video is going to be a bit longer than the previous devlogs. It's essentially a combined update covering everything I did and document along the way, so I wanted to take the time to walk through it properly. In the first devlog video, I said I'll be posting updates at the end of every sprint. Or at least I'll try to. Yeah, I knew doing that wouldn't be easy. I even wrote a comment on a fellow devlog video about making devlogs while working on your project. Something along the lines of, if you want to make devlogs, you have to try to incorporate them into your schedule because they do take time, and that time can detract from the actual project itself. Well, while I did have fun making the videos, I kept underestimating how much time they actually took. Sometimes I also felt like I wasn't where I needed to be in certain sprints because of the time I spent on the video. Granted, the video could have been like the first one I made, which was pretty much just a show and tell of what I did, but I think my brain wanted to keep it entertaining, like I was telling a story. I think I landed that better in the second devlog that I made because I actually really liked that one. I also want to say that when I started this journey, I was live streaming, but it was marked as unlisted. I mainly wanted to capture footage of my work and hold myself accountable, especially since I had just left my job in September with the goal of breaking into the video game industry. At some point, I did go public. I guess I got a little lonely, but people were joining and I had some great conversations, and talking to people even helped me understand my goals and what I was trying to do a bit better. But overall, I'm kind of an awkward guy, and on top of that, I was pulling long hours, usually like 10 to 12 hours a day, and I think burnout eventually caught up to me, even though I told myself I was pacing. Yeah, that's not pacing yourself. I've learned that going hard for about 2 months seems to be my limit before burnout sets in, and that's good to know. So if you were someone who joined the live streams to follow the progress, I'm sorry that I stopped going public with the streams out of the blue. That said, I didn't completely stop working on the project, I just had a lot of slow days and sometimes wanted to work in Zen mode. Okay, now one final thing before we get into the work itself. I want to set expectations clearly. The goal of this project was to create a polished vertical slice, something that represents what the final game might feel like. I didn't fully hit that bar. What you're about to see is rough across the board. Animations are stiff, the UI isn't polished, environments are blocky, the character isn't finalized, and the vertical slice level is just a bunch of untextured geometry. Though this is still the result of pushing towards polish and seeing where my skills, time, and scope fell short, not avoiding polish altogether. With that said, let's take a look at what I worked on over the past 2 months, starting with Sprint 5. Over the course of this project, as I was building systems and putting things together, I tried to keep everything scalable and structured properly. I wanted good naming conventions, modular systems, and code that made sense. But along the way, I kept feeling like things could be better, so this sprint ended up shifting towards refactoring. At first, that went okay. I created a cleaner folder structure and reorganized systems. After moving folders around, I had to rehook a lot of scene assets to point to the new script locations, which was fine, but the bigger problem was my refactor goal was too vague. Essentially, I just felt like my code was bad. Now, I'll be honest, I kinda just threw things at ChatGPT and said, fix this, which didn't really work. Okay, I didn't actually do that, but what I was doing was close enough to that. I eventually realized I wasn't making any meaningful progress. I knew that I at least wanted proper public and private variables and a cleaner structure, but it became clear that doing that across the whole project would take way too long and would basically mean restarting. So I logged 3 days on the Refactor task, ended it there, and treated it as a lesson. I kept the new folder structure and started applying better habits going forward instead of trying to fix everything retroactively. From there, I started working on a player health system because I didn't already have one, and I wanted to have that so it would make the combat loop feel complete when I integrated the heavy stance. Using my new coding structure with proper naming conventions and even regions, which allow you to label your code and collapse it all at once, I created the health components. With all the health components completed, I put together the UI and moved on to the heavy stance. I was back in Blender, stumbling through figuring out animations and making something that felt natural. The idle animation is definitely better than the one I made first.
You sure about that? You sure about that?
But it can still be improved. I worked on that and the first attack, which is supposed to be a leap for gap closing. Of course, from there, I had to figure out that root motion and character controllers don't work together, so I ended up moving the player via code during the leap. On top of that, I had to figure out how to incorporate knockbacks into the attacks. I didn't initially create a separate task for it, so it ended up getting rolled into the heavy stance work. By the end of the sprint, I had a full 3-hit combo for the heavy stance with a leap and knockback. Visually it's rough, but it was enough to start testing how the stance actually played. I wanted to work on the ranged weapon during this sprint, but after working too long on the Refactor task, I didn't have enough time. So I stuck to my schedule and ended the sprint on the planned day, moving that work to the next sprint instead. This sprint originally focused on finalizing the vertical slice layout and enemy combat behaviors, but it was revised to stay flexible. The boss had been planned for an earlier sprint, but since that didn't work out, it was moved here. I also realized that I wanted the boss to incorporate mechanics from each stance, but I didn't even have enemies that actually required stance switching. So the first thing I worked on was enemy behavior. I created enemies with shields that could only be broken in the heavy stance, enemies that required attacking from behind, pushing the use of the hype teleport, and basic enemies that served as fodder to regenerate energy. I know the enemies are far from interesting or smart, but I needed to do something, so I ended up making the systems very basic and they do exactly what they need. Next up was the grenade launcher. I already had most of the foundation built, so the main work here was applying damage and knockback and creating the weapon prefab. I did run into a small issue with the shoot point due to the root orientation, but once that was fixed, the weapon worked as expected. Then I moved on to the boss. At this point, I kind of accepted that art wasn't going to be my focus. I didn't want to force visuals that I knew wouldn't look great, so I focused on functionality instead. The boss is pretty simple. It has a shield that can only be broken in the heavy stance, and when that shield breaks, the boss is stunned, allowing for the player to reposition and attack its weak point using the hype stance. Ideally, the boss arena would spawn grunt enemies to allow the player to regenerate energy, but for this task, the boss has an idle state, chase state, attack windup, attack state, stun state, and dead state. It also has a basic anticipation animation before attacking. The next task was scripting the boss mission. This ended up being more complicated than I expected. To support it, I had to rework the mission board in UI so it could handle multiple missions on a single board. This is an example of one of the things I thought would probably need to be refactored with the refactoring task, but I realized it doesn't hurt to fix it as I go. I also adjusted things like having the boss automatically find the player and creating a separate scene specifically for the boss encounter. The final task of this sprint was blocking out the vertical slice level. This is actually where I fully revisited my story to try and figure out how I could create a level that ties into the story and world. I even ended up rewriting some of the dialogue and story, which I hadn't touched since I started writing the story back in high school. After I came up with something, I jumped right in. I knew I wanted the first level to be in an abandoned factory area, and I wanted the world to be set in the future with hover cars and holographic signs, so that was the kind of vibe I was gonna try to set. I was going to try to throw together a level map as I did back in school, but I just wanted to see how it felt in engine. I had the ideas in my head, I just needed to see them laid out. Once the layout was done, I also placed enemies throughout the level. Of course, the vertical slice level should at least introduce the mechanics, so I had it in my mind that there would be scripted situations in the game, like shooting a sign with your sniper in order to make a bridge to cross to the other side, or shooting generators to destroy a barrier. Those were the only two things I managed to script into the actual mission. And with that, it was the end of the sprint. Sprint 7 was supposed to be about polishing and cleaning everything up. At this point, I had a playable character, 3 combat stances, a music system that switched genres, enemies that deal and take damage, and missions that could be completed or failed. I knew animations still needed a lot of work, and I didn't think I could realistically overhaul them. So instead, I thought I'd try and focus on making combat feel better. I added hit effects like camera shake and hit stop. Around this time, I think I was really burnt out. I attempted to work on this task, but didn't like what I came up with, so I ended up reverting the changes. Then, after a few days had passed and I was feeling better, I was up and at 'em. Today is a good day because it is the first. I got the hit stop and camera shake to work. I think this actually did make hitting enemies feel a bit more satisfying. It still may not look great, but it did help combat feel better, which was the goal. I also added some extra visual effects like trail renderers for the fists and feet, and also impact effects. I also experimented with a beat pulse tied to the music's BPM, but ended up scrapping that idea. The final things I worked on this sprint were the pause menu and main menu. The pause menu kept getting pushed back, so I made sure to get it done here. Once I was working on that, it made sense to knock out the main menu as well, so the full loop was in place. Because I took so many days off during this sprint, a few tasks didn't get done, so I pushed them to the final sprint. These included polishing visuals for a showcase, playtesting and iterating on feedback, a final balance pass, and building the hub environment. So here we are, the final sprint of the project, with the goal of finalizing everything and creating a trailer and build for my portfolio. Let's see how this turned out. Before starting the sprint, I actually sat down and reported bugs on things that didn't work exactly how I wanted. I think the reason I didn't actually file any bug reports during previous sprints is that I felt like I knew what didn't work and why, and I thought I'd fix it later and worry about it when I came back to it. But I don't think it would have hurt to do this at the beginning or end of each sprint. Either way, I had an idea of what I could focus on for the last 2 weeks. The first thing I really wanted to do was create an environment for the hub scene, because I had consistently pushed that task back pretty much since Sprint 4. The hub is where the player checks in to progress the story. The hub environment would hold items such as the mission board, NPCs, player loadouts, and maybe appearance changes, things like that. Of course, for the scope of this project, it would be confined to just the mission board. It's supposed to be like a police academy with dorms for the recruits and cadets, a training hall, and a campus for learning about magic. The most I could do here was block out the environment, and I tried slapping on some textures, but of course, I couldn't put all my focus into this task, seeing as there was still much to be done. After working a few days on the hub scene, I finished the rough layout for the main HQ, added new materials and textures for the interior and exterior of the HQ building, added a perimeter around the building to block off the player, added the hub scene to the main menu, and made it so the player returns to the new hub scene when missions are complete. After I finished that, I tackled some of the bugs I had reported. Since most of the bugs were animation related, I decided to tackle those together later, and the first thing I fixed was the player not falling after they attack in midair. Though I had intended to implement air attacks, they aren't implemented yet, so it doesn't look right when the player stays in the air while doing his ground attacks. With that done, I could focus on the animation bugs. The first issue I tried addressing was the feet. I noticed that in the game, the character's feet were sliding and weren't even with the ground, even though they're planted in Blender. I was using a separate model to animate with because when using my actual character model, I experienced significant lag. At this point, I wasn't sure whether that was the reason the animations got messed up, so I tried using the actual model for the animations instead, and that fixed it. His feet were now planted, which meant I could pretty much fix all the other tasks by using the actual model rather than the separate one. I did have a small hiccup with the trench coat, which took me a while to figure out, but once I did, the animation bugs I reported were gone. I fixed the clothing clipping problem by deleting the layers that didn't need to be seen. Another fix included ground detection. I realized I wasn't using the character controller capsule properly, so grounding is now based on that instead of an arbitrary transform. The final task was a balance pass. I tuned energy regen and drain per stance, connected hype's increased movement and attack speed to the energy system, connected heavy's increased damage and slower movement speed to the energy system, and made sure ranged weapons required energy to fire. With those values tuned, I also fixed smaller things that felt off while playing, like enemies getting knocked back through walls or adjusting how enemies face the player. So this is what I accomplished in 4 months on my own. From the beginning, the goal wasn't to finish the entire game, but to create a playable, polished slice that demonstrates my skills in game design, systems implementation, and production. Something that could serve as a portfolio piece to help me break into the video game industry. I'm not gonna lie, I did expect the polish to be a little shinier, but that's okay. I think there's still a lot of promise in this project, and I'm genuinely happy that I worked on it. The reason I started working on this project by myself is that even though I tried to plan and document everything, I still feel like I'm figuring things out as I go. And I feel like bringing someone else along would have felt like a big gamble, even though I know teamwork is one of the most important parts of working on a larger team or at a bigger company. I at least wanted to prove to myself that I have the skills needed to contribute to something. I'm not sure if this project is over or not. I do feel like there's potential to get a team together to make it look prettier, add better animations, models, textures, audio, and cleaner systems. But what I do know is that the time I gave myself for this phase is up, and I need to move on to the next part of my plan, focusing on the industry side of things. Over the next couple of months, that means updating my resume and portfolio, looking at who's hiring, playing more games with intent so I can understand how I might contribute to different studios, networking, and weighing my options. That's what this project has been building toward, alongside my education in this whole journey. I hope I can make it.